Colleagues, welcome along. Thank you very much for joining us today for today's webinar from the National Youth Agency on our COVID-19 guidance for the youth sector. My name is Lee Middleton. I'm Chief Executive of the NYA and sort of been leading the guidance project, working alongside senior officials at the government, Department for Culture, Media and Sport. I'm joined today in the background, you probably won't hear or see him, but my brilliant colleague Alex, who leads all our comms and digital stuff. What I encourage you to do as we go through this is to post any questions you've got into the chat. Alex will pick those out and put them through to me separately. So once I've done a quick presentation to you, we'll start and go through your questions, and we'll try and do as many as we can with the time we've got. And if we run out, then we'll end early. So thank you for joining us. First things first is it's well worth you looking at this first page and joining and signing up to all the different channels the NYA's got. We put communications out whenever there's a change to guidance through Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as our website and our network. So it's worth registering on all of those, and you'll then get all the information as quick as you can at the same time as things change. We are operating in a landscape that is constantly moving, and we have to do our best to keep up. So I'm really grateful to the sector for its patience, because the government makes an announcement, we then have to go and work out what that means, then probably negotiate a bit to really work out what that means, and then we make changes, and then we get to tell the world. So do sign up and to join us. So thank you for joining us today. We don't want to run through everything when it comes to youth sector guidance. We did a webinar about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and you can go on our YouTube channel and you can watch the video of that. It's about an hour long as well, but the presentation sort of 20-25 minutes at the beginning. So do take a look at that, and that will give you a much more flavorful view of everything we're doing. One thing I will be picking up here is some key messages that are coming through to us, all the questions that are asked to us. I'm going to recap some of those because they're probably at the front of most people's minds, and I'm also going to talk you through some of the changes that or lack of changes actually, but things that are going around in the national picture around COVID-19 and what we need to be doing as a sector. So first things first, this is the current guidance document. This is version 2, and it is the active document that is out there, and it's been downloaded 17,000 times. It's clearly being used by the sector. Do take a look at it, do use it. All our guidance is recognised and endorsed by Public Health England, the Health and Safety Executive, and the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, which is the youth sector's home department. I could also add to that probably the Department for Education, because we're working pretty closely with those colleagues as well to make sure there's good alignment between what they're doing for out of school settings and what we're allowing the youth sector to do, and we align quite closely. There is a version 3 of our guidance coming, which is going to look a bit like this. It'll be a green version. We'd prepared this all in September, but then obviously we learned that the 3 tiers were coming on board, and so we stopped, and we wanted to wait and see what was going to happen, and then we'll publish this. So we finished the text on this is with the lawyers at the government to agree that we are fully compliant with the regulations. Assuming we get that nod, hopefully next week we will publish this guidance. All this should do is to clarify a few things, and there are some areas that might change, and I'll try and give you a bit of a flavour of what some of those might be, but be very clear they're not in force today. Follow the blue document, and you'll be doing well. So a few things to say. If you're a member of a national association, there's a few of them on the screen, there are many others, then please also take serious note of any advice and guidance that those colleagues and those organisations put out. I have literally just jumped off an almost identical session with the Youth United Foundation members, all the uniform groups, talking to the leaders there of the changes and what they need to be thinking through. They will publish their own additional information, and they will support you as best they can as well. So it is important that the NYA provides a baseline of information which is fully compliant with the regulations, but it's absolutely right and appropriate that maybe the Scouts or the Army Cadets or others choose to do other additional measures or require additional things in and around our guidance. We fully support them in doing so. They do talk to us, so we're quite aware of a lot of that, but yeah, do take a note of your national association as well. I need to just highlight that the guidance that we're going to be talking about today is England only. It's only specific to England. There is separate guidance for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. We do communicate with those nations, but our guidance is very much England specific. And if you operate across borders, then you need to be aware of the different requirements in different spaces. And unfortunately, you can't say, well, the advice in Scotland is a bit more friendlier than the one than England. We'd like to follow Scotland's advice. That doesn't work. In terms of the legislation, if you're in England and you're operating in England, you need to be following the NYA's guidance and advice. Version 3 is coming, and what we've tried to do is take some of the changes that have happened this week on the national spectrum and put this more clearly in the document for people. Also, what we do is we look at all the questions that we're being asked, and then we try and build those into the new documents to try and be more supportive to the sector. So I say this should be out next week. I'm not going to show you this, but this is a video that we created. Apologies. What an inappropriate time to drop out. There we go. So I'll just recap where I was. There's a video that we created. I think trying to load the video in knocked my computer over. So I won't try that again. But you can go on our YouTube channel or go on our website, and on our website you will find our COVID page where you'll find all our guidance, and on that page you'll find access to the video. It is really worth watching that. It's still relevant, still current. And I would encourage volunteers and young people to be watching that video and maybe recap it as well if you haven't seen it for a while, because it does keep your mind fresh of the things you need to be aware of. So one of the things we wanted to obviously pick up today was the need around the local tiers that have been brought in. Now, the government refer to these in two different ways, either tiers 1, 2, and 3, or medium, high, and very high. I'll be encouraging them to stick to one naming method or the other, but for now, I'm going to use medium, high, and very high. So at the moment, the only area in the country that is currently very high is the Liverpool City region. We've got a separate webinar for colleagues in that area tomorrow, working with Youth Focus Northwest. So if you're interested in joining that, then by all means do, but it'll be very much a recap of what I'm covering with you here today. The key message is that the youth sector's destiny in terms of being allowed to open and be operative, open and active, is very much connected to schools. So if schools are operating in your area, then the chances are it's very much going to be allowed for the youth sector. And this is for very deliberate reasons and well thought through. And I just wanted to sort of spend a bit of time just talking through it. So we work with the Department for Education, we work with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, Public Health England. We look at all the information, and those guys, those government departments advise us on what our guidance should be for the sector. And we recognise and understand that the challenges of COVID-19 for young people are significant. And actually the lockdown, when that took place and shutting off all services, had a devastating impact on many young people. And the government doesn't want that to happen again. So if we're allowed to keep youth sector activity, if we're allowed to keep schools open, as a nation, then we will keep the youth sector going, because we provide a vital source of support for those young people. So, and the result of that is that whether we're medium, high or very high, we are still at amber on the NYA readiness level. And amber means that you can operate in bubbles of 15, and you can have multiple bubbles potentially. You can have your activities open. I'll cover some of those in a second. But what we are allowing you to do is to continue to operate. So even in that Liverpool area, and there are other areas of the country being talked about moving into tier 3 or very high, youth sector activity will still be allowed. Now that the regulations, the law of the land will permit that to be the case. There might be very local restrictions that your local authority says, actually, we don't wish certain activities to take place. And if that's the case, we will update those areas via our website. But the overarching message is that actually it's too important to keep the youth sector going. We will do so. The other part of this is also recognizing that young people are not they're not the most vulnerable. They're also not the super spreaders. The young people in schools are less of a concern in terms of spreading the virus around. Now, you might have seen stuff in the media about young people, very much in the profile of the media around spreading the virus. But actually, if you look at the data, and we've done this and the government's done this, you're very much talking of your 19 to 30-year-olds, your student population, your young adults, as I would prefer to call them, rather than young people. And those young adults are going down bars, pubs, and partying, and good on them, and allowed to have a good time. But the risk is that does spread the virus. In teenagers and under, down to sort of, I know cubs and beaver groups can be at 4 and 5-year-olds, all the way up to 18-year-olds. That is not the demographic of the nation that is spreading the virus. So because of that, we can responsibly and actively maintain the youth sector and keep our services open. So we've been working with those government departments to look at the information and to make the case. And it is a negotiation, and you know, some of organisations would like us to go further, and others feel that maybe you know, at very high there should be no youth services at all. But the risk of taking services away from the most vulnerable young people in our communities is too high. It is judged too high. We agree with that, and therefore we are permitting youth sector activity at very high, and there are no restrictions beyond the blue COVID version 2 guidance requirements. So what does that then mean for us? So one thing I just wanted to flag, that one thing's really helpful this time around is that the government have published a series of posters. We will put these on our website. You'll be able to download them in the not too distant future. You can find them on social media. They're on the Number 10 Facebook page, etc. But these posters, for the first time, if you look in the bottom corner here, it says youth clubs and activities at medium, high, and very high. And at all three levels, it very clearly says youth clubs and activities are permitted. And youth clubs and activities includes all uniform groups, it includes all, you know, all youth clubs, all sort of specific projects, and anything that comes under the NYA's guidance is permitted, even at very, very high, or the very high level. And what you can do is print these off. You could put them up in the centre in the venue you're using. And if parents thinking, oh, I'm not so sure this should be open, you can point to the government poster, because it really clearly says the youth sector can operate. That's perfectly reasonable. And if you need to talk to your local authority, you can also show them this as well, because it also highlights this to them. These posters are really useful. We've been asking the government for quite some time now to sort of make more of a public declaration that the youth sector can be active. They've done it at long last. Thank you very much to the team at Number 10. And so, you know, use these posters to be reassured as well. So this is as it stands today. So we've currently got our readiness levels. We are currently at amber. So amber means that all online and digital youth services can take place, that we can operate detached and outdoor local youth services. And what we mean by outdoor youth services is anything the youth sector does you know, not in a building, you know, whether it's in a park, outside in the streets, detached youth work, or whether it be, you know, a football contest in a park or whatever it would be. Anything external is what we mean by outdoor local youth services. We can operate one-to-one, and we can also operate in small targeted group sessions indoors as well. So within the indoors work, that's bubbles of 15, and you can have more than one bubble if you've got enough space. I'll come on to bubbles in a little bit. Question that comes up a lot is, well, we really want to go on a residential, we really want to go on trips, is that allowed? So at Amber, you can do a day trip, but you can't stay overnight. We're asked quite a lot is, when will we be able to go and do camping? When will we be able to do residentials? And the only honest answer I can give you is I don't see that changing till at least Easter. Summer term next year, sometime at that point. It is regulated and controlled by the Department for Education, the decision around that, and it's very much pegged to what schools are allowed to do. And the team at the DfE have been pretty clear. They're not interested in looking at overnight trips and visits. Their priority is keeping schools open and supporting them. So I don't expect there to be regulation changes regarding going us to yellow, which would allow overnight trips, Easter and beyond. We've got to get through this winter period, and then hopefully by next summer we will certainly be allowing residentials. So if you had things planned, be really aware that rules are unlikely to change in the next, you know, certainly the next 6 months. I would be impressed. If it does, we will let you know, but I'd be impressed. One of the things that is going to be coming in the new guidance is there is going to be a change to red. So I talked a little earlier about the need to provide youth sector activity to the most vulnerable young people. And that has been recognised fully by the government. And so even if schools do close, at red, we will still be able to operate one session of targeted youth work or targeted youth sector activity. So that might be a group of between 5 and 10. We don't quite know at this point. We're still working that out. But even if schools are closed, it was so devastating when schools were shut, youth sector shut before, the harm and trauma that caused to young people was so significant for certain young people that we don't want to see that happening again. And again, we've got agreement that there will always be the opportunity to have some small group work continuing indoors, but only one group. So you couldn't have 3 or 4 operating at the same time. It would only be one bubble of young people at red. I've been asked quite a bit of do we think we'll end up at red? Is red an option, something that's likely to happen? I think it's possible. I think it would only happen in very localized areas, and looking at all the modelling that's been done and all the scenario planning the government has done, at all of those scenarios, schools remain open. Now, there are some scenarios where schools may move to 1 week on, 1 week off, or 2 weeks on or 2 weeks off. But even in those scenarios, the youth sector remains at amber and should be allowed to continue to operate. Now, I should caveat that by saying anything can happen if the virus rockets and becomes a major problem, if the government wobbles, and it might do, and it could be perfectly right to do so. Well, then we may be asked to take different measures, and we would communicate that to the sector as quick as we can in the right way. But as we see it today, with the new tier system and even the planning that's sort of going beyond those tiers, we do not see the youth sector closing and moving away from amber in a hurry. One thing I did want to say, though, is just because you can doesn't mean you have to. And there's no one at the NYA, none of our guidance says you must open or you must doing things. So if you're not feeling confident, you don't think you can operate safely, if your staff team don't feel, that it's appropriate, if your parents that you work with are not comfortable with you operating, there's nobody saying you must do this. And actually doing nothing is the default. So if it's not safe, if you're not confident, then there's no one pressurizing anybody to do something now. And if you need to take a bit of time to think it through, to understand it, or maybe make the decision, actually, now is just not the time to open up and do our activities, then that is absolutely fine. And we would fully support any organization that took that judgment. But we are keen to support the most vulnerable young people. If you're following our guidance to the full, you are completely right and appropriate to operate and do your thing. So just wanted to flag those couple of points to you. Well worth looking at our website. We update the website periodically as and when things change. Actually, the image I'm showing you here is an old screenshot, but you get the orange box that will pop up. The color and the A is for amber. The pop-up box will tell you that what is allowed at the moment. If you've cleared that box, you'll actually find it on the orange bar right behind it, and it will tell you exactly what types of activities are allowed where, and if there are any very specific local restrictions. So we had Leicester at one point that had to close, but everybody else was open. Then we will explain all that on our front page, and you will be able to see that. You also click on that blue box there, and it will take you through to the guidance document. So do keep an eye on our website. It's the #1 place to go every day, every week, to keep up to speed with what's going on. We have our network, so you can, if you look at the top here, you've got this member login. If you click on that, you can register with the NYA. It's totally free. We don't spam you, but we will keep you up to date with anything that we're working on, and also all the guidance information. And that'll be the fastest way of getting information straight to your inbox. So it is worth registering on the NYA network. So what changed last week, this week, when the government announced its new 3 tiers? Well, in short, as I said last time in the previous webinar, actually nothing. Whatever you were doing last week, you can do this week, and you can do next week as it stands. Whatever you were planning to do this week, you can do next week. The sector is active and allowed to be operating, and as long as we're following the basic rules and COVID secure, following our guidance, then we don't need to do anything different. But you do need to keep your risk assessment up to speed. You do need to be reviewing things quite regularly, and it's worth keeping an eye on that. So key messages from the government are always the same at the moment, which is really good. And I think it's getting clearer, so it's probably helpful. But and we've all got a duty here to educate young people that hands, face and space, so wash your hands, cover your face and make space, are key messages that sort of run through all the guidance projects across the country, no matter what sector, whether it's libraries, museums, gyms, or ourselves. Do be talking to young people and doing your best to make sure that we're washing hands, covering our face, and making good space. So what does COVID secure look like for the youth sector? I'm going to put this list up all in one go now. So we need to be making sure that all our action plans are in place. And that's really to make sure we know who's got what roles and responsibilities. So whose job is it to make sure that the cleaning is going on, that we're monitoring things effectively, who's doing the risk assessments, who's engaging parents, or whatever it might be. And we've got that action plan in place, and it's nice and robust. Then we need to, the most work probably goes into your risk assessment and making sure that your risk assessment is up to date. You should certainly, in the light of this week's announcements, be digging that out and having a look at it. We would probably encourage people to be looking at that, weekly, every other week, maybe, really keeping those up to speed. And if you've just glanced through it and you're saying, actually, this is just as good as it was before, then you don't have to change it for the sake of it, but you've checked it and you can show that you're demonstrating that you're being really responsible by keeping those up to speed. So bubbles and group sizes that are manageable and age appropriate, that's really important. Bubbles of 15, there are going to be some changes around bubbles, it looks, so I will talk you through those in a little while. They're not enforced today, and I don't want to confuse people, but just give you a heads up of some of the thinking that's coming. But today, bubbles of 15, you can have more than one bubble if you've got enough space. If you've got different rooms, you could have one bubble in each room. They should not mix, and your workers shouldn't mix ideally, but they can if they have to, because the welfare of young people, there was a health and safety incident or welfare issue, those responsibilities would override COVID secure. So we're operating in those clear bubbles is important. Hygiene needs to be really robust, lots of hand washing, making sure the venue is clean, and for that is washing down handles and doors and touch plates, the common places in which people congregate and move. And so if you're always opening a certain door, try and prop it open maybe. Do think of fire regs, to be fair, but there are, if you've got someone always touching the same door, that's a clear way of spreading the virus if it happens to happen. Face coverings need to be worn, and everybody should be looking at those and making sure if you're aged 11 or over, I've got a slide on this, so I shall go into that in more depth in a second, but face coverings. Look at the health and well-being of young people and staff. And I put this back on here again because actually we're still seeing a lot of focus on young people's health and well-being, which is just awesome, but actually we just got to have as much focus on our staff, because staff are older typically, they are often more vulnerable, and if they're older volunteers in particular, then the risk of the virus to them could be even higher. And we've got to be responsible, and if actually now is not the time for those volunteers or staff members to be working, then you need to be making your judgments about whether you can operate at all or whether we ask them to do alternative duties. Your safeguarding needs to be super duper robust, as always. This isn't actually a factor of COVID secure, but I've put it on here because what we've seen some examples of where we're all focused on risk of COVID, but we're not as focused on safeguarding young people. Please, please, please be very focused on both. And our social distancing, 1 meter plus, ideally 2 meters or more, keeping people spread out, even inside when they're doing activities is really important, and following those rules. And then being aware of the NHS test and trace system. For those that are over 16, the app is appropriate and the QR codes in certain venues are appropriate. But supporting NHS test and trace as best we can is important. And what we're trying to demonstrate here, and what we're being able to do very well, because the auditing is showing, is that where the sector is following all these guides, it is operating nice and safely. And that's why, although there might be an area that's very high, the youth sector is safe to operate and is trusted to continue. And we need to maintain that as best we can. So let me just move on. So bubbles, I talked about this a second ago, but bubbles, yes, those bubbles are 15. You can have more than one bubble if necessary. Staff are an additional to the bubbles of 15, and also key workers. So if you've got, say, a young person with special education needs and disabilities, and they have a support worker, they could be in addition to that bubble. We do encourage organisations that if bubbles are getting too big, that then break them into two or spread them out a bit. If we don't want bubbles of more than 20, with staff and key workers, that's too large. So please be responsible, just be logical and shrink those down. There are some changes that will be coming in the next version of the guidance. They're not enforced today, but the regulations regarding over 18s and under 18s have changed. We are seeking a further exemption to bring both into line again, so that we can treat, have bubbles of 15 over 18. But currently the law requires you could have one bubble of 15 with over 18-year-olds, but that also includes staff. But if you've got more than 15 young people, you've got to break the whole group into groups of 6 and have separate spaces. We've asked for the exemption. We are going through that process. The reason the version 3 of the guidance isn't out is because we're waiting on the response to that. So it may well be when that document comes out, actually we stay as we are, bubbles of 15 for all ages, great. We hope that's the case. But if not, then there will be a difference between the age groups. One of the other changes that we've been asked to apply by the Department for Education is to try and move towards having more consistent bubbles. So if it's possible to have week by week the same young people in a bubble, then ideally do so. We've explained and we've gone through in very clear terms that actually for a drop-in youth club, that just doesn't work 90% of the time. That is fine. The world understands that. That is perfectly reasonable. But where we can, we should try. But if it's not practical, we don't have to. And I think that's our key message. So there are some nuanced changes coming to bubbles. It doesn't affect the new tier system. It's got nothing to do with that. This was all happening anyway. But just to give you a heads up of some of the things that might be coming. Face coverings. So all those are 11 or over, so aged 11, so they have had their 11th birthday or above, should be wearing a face covering indoors when attending youth sector activities. There are some very good and perfectly reasonable exemptions where they wouldn't have to. That is absolutely fine. But for most young people, 11 and above, face covering should be worn. One of the other tweaks that's coming is that the staff also now need to be wearing face coverings. Originally, a bit like shop staff, shop staff didn't have to wear face coverings. Now they should, unless they've got a valid exemption. That will also from next week apply to the youth sector. So over 11 face coverings plus workers next week. Just to re-highlight really that we've also done a separate guidance document with the Federation of Detached Youth Work around detached youth work settings, outdoor settings. If you're operating outside, and by outside we mean, you know, not in your, if you've got a scout hut and it's got a field next to it, then you don't need to follow this guidance. But if you're wandering the streets, if you're outside shops, if you're doing other activities, which we might call more detached youth work, there is specific extra guidance to help you. So worth taking a look at. We worked with UK Youth right at the beginning of the pandemic. We had not a lot of time, but we worked brilliantly together and we created a dedicated support website for the youth sector. So youthworksupport.co.uk. It's actually run by Alex, who's in the background here supporting us today. And on there are hundreds of tools and resources. There are work kits, all sorts of things, activities you can do with young people. There's also on the front page the templates and the information you need to make sure you've got your action plan, your COVID risk assessment. Don't have to follow those tools. They are just there as guides, but if it's helpful to you, then please do follow them. But lots of resources on there. There's also some free training on there, and there'll be a lot more training coming from the NYA in the next few weeks and months to support the sector through the next period of COVID-19. Just a shameless plug really, but we've been quite busy at the NYA in developing reports, knowledge and insight into the impact of the virus on young people. I encourage anyone to go and have a look at these reports. The first one, Out of Sight, told us that normally around 1 million young people engage in youth work and youth sector activities a year. That the demand for services is now 3 million. It's the need level of young people was so shocked as a result of the initial lockdown, you know, the removal of access to your friends and peers, the removal of access to trusted adults, the being stuck at home with your family and the mental health challenge that some of these things have brought, exam stress, that now 3 million young people need our services. So more young people need us than ever, which is one of the reasons we're trying to keep the youth sector active in a responsible way. Worth going on our YouTube channel and do subscribe there. You'll see that we've got our COVID guidance video. There's also the previous webinar there you can have a look at as well. So do go and have a look and lots of other videos and other topics related to the youth sector and youth work in particular. So that's the end of my bit in terms of presentation to you all. We've got the chat room, so please put your questions in there. Alex has been feeding them through to me on a different channel, so I will we'll start and try and go through those questions, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. If we don't get to your question, then do send us. You can write to us at guidance@nya.org.uk, and that comes to our guidance inbox, and we will get back to you within 48 hours. So let me scroll to the top of this list, and here we go. Right. So Anna asks, we have some youth groups who used to meet in houses. What is the guidance on that? Can you COVID secure them to make it possible, or can youth provisions only be COVID secure in rented places? NYA as a professional body, it depends on houses. So there are some community houses, for example, where housing association makes a specific house available to the community to meet for to book for rooms and meetings and things. That would be classed as a public venue for us. But if it's meeting in individuals' private homes, then we wouldn't endorse or recognise that, and we'd actively discourage it. Is how we would describe that. We are actually publishing some new national guidelines on practice in the next couple of weeks, which will be more clearer on discouraging the use of private residences. We've had questions around using people's gardens. The problem is people have to go in and out of toilets and use kitchen spaces. There are big safeguarding issues there. There's the national inquiry going on at the moment around child sexual abuse, and it's just an area that we do not feel comfortable as a national body endorsing or recognising. So yeah, prefer that doesn't happen, please. And so it's not recognised under the NYA's guidance, only a public venue. It doesn't have to be it could be a golf club, it could be a village hall, a school. It doesn't have to be a community venue, but it needs to be a public venue and not a private residence is how we would describe it. So next question is from Dan. We're operating youth sector activities in the Wirral in a tier 3 area. Can we still meet with young people in places like cafes? Can social activities like bowling take place? In short, yes, you can continue to operate as normal as long as the venues you wish to go and visit or meet young people in are open and it was within their boundaries. So I had a question this morning on our emails. We want to take a group of young people bowling. Can I go as a bubble of 15 bowling? Is that safe and appropriate? And the answer is, from our point of view, that's absolutely fine. You could be a bubble of 15 and go bowling. But if the bowling alley only wants groups of 6, and it's perfectly right and appropriate for them to say so, then you need to work with them and agree a way forward. So if you want to go bowling and you can only go in groups of 6, then you need to go in multiple groups of 6. But trips and activities are fine. Meeting in cafes and things like that are fine. If the general public can do it, then there's no reason why we can't be doing that with young people. Keep your distance, face coverings if appropriate. Hygiene needs to be good. Risk assess it all, and lone working practice also ought to be in place as well. But yeah, no, even in the Wirral, you can do those things. That's absolutely fine. Shalene has asked, what does the government's change of tiers in London mean for London youth provision from Saturday and the additional restrictions regarding families mixing? So this is, we had a lot of questions this morning about this. So nothing changes. So if it's the Shalina I know from Youth First, welcome. You can continue to run your youth centres in Lewisham as you do today, and you do not need to make any changes beyond the guidance that we publish. The families mixing is very much around family groups mixing in homes and gardens, or even there's certain rules around public spaces as well. But the youth sector activities are very separate to that. We are covered by different exemptions, and we are allowed to continue to operate in our youth centres in your bubbles of 15 because you've got hygiene, because it's risk assessed, because your staff are aware of the risks, because you're there being responsible. Whereas what the government is trying to avoid is lots of large families all coming around and probably a bit late now, but having a barbecue and spreading the virus. But a youth sector space following NYA guidance is safe and appropriate. And so the message is no change, no change. All right, let's move on. Ooh, here we go. So Carol's asked, is there specific guidelines around the use of Zoom package? Maybe YouthWorks, plug for YouthWorks support. So there is information on the YouthWorks support website. There is dedicated resources around digital youth work. There's even a training package, I think, on there around delivering digital youth work. Zoom is one of many, many platforms the sector is using. It's done rightly and securely with codes, etc. It's perfectly reasonable. It's probably the most prevalent one we use. But there is information on the YouthWorks support website. Do go and have a look. I don't know if there's anything specific about Zoom, but certainly the principles of doing online youth work is there. We've also done some webinars, and if we haven't, we've got one more coming on this topic, I think, from the NYA. So keep an eye on our social media channels or a look at our YouTube channel, and you'll see the videos that we might have done in the past where we've picked up on some of these hot topics. So Steve has asked, can bubbles be mixed ages within the 15? So yes, they can, but from a professional standpoint, having a group of 5-year-olds with a group of 19-year-olds or 18-year-olds, there are differences in developmental age issues. There are differences in behaviour and language that different age ranges may use. So we encourage organisations to operate in what we would call age appropriate bubbles. But you don't have to have all 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds in separate bubbles. You can mix them up. That's fine. Samantha's asked, would love to know if any youth services are providing transport to and from activities, especially for young people over the age of 11. We're aware of some of this. Yes, there are certain projects using minibuses or public transport to support transportation of young people. Again, difficult. You have to be spaced out. You need to be face coverings. You need lots of hand sanitizer. But it is happening in certain places. That's not a problem. Worth doing. Louise has asked, are we allowed to continue social distance youth sport activities inside for young people in tier 2? Yes, so nothing has changed. So you could do that before the tiers came in, and you can do that absolutely now. Even up at tier 3, that indoor sports are fine in a COVID secure NYA, following the guidance of NYA. That's absolutely fine. Tiny's asked, what happens to services in the event of a circuit break? Great question. I'm asking that of government, and I do not know is the answer. So it may well be, if there's a 2-week circuit break around and schools are involved in that, then the youth sector may move to red during that circuit break area. There seems to be a lot of resistance at government about having a national circuit break. There might be some local ones, and those areas may well then move into the red level of our framework. But even at red, you will still be allowed to do that, some small group work indoors with groups of young people, maybe 5 to 10. We're not quite clear yet. We're still working that detail out, but that will all be published in next week's guidance update. Ooh. Natalie's asked, any ideas on implications on residentials and numbers of young people, etc., even if lots of space and rooms to accommodate for social distancing? Yeah, the bad news is, unfortunately, you're just not allowed to do it. It is against the law. We are not allowed to go and do overnight events, trips and visits. You can do a day trip, but you can't stay overnight. It is just against the regulations as they're laid out. That is the same rules for schools, and it doesn't. And there I've seen. I used to run or be involved in the running of outdoor learning centres. With great space, separate rooms. None of that matters, unfortunately, in the blanket decision of the government and the Department for Education to restrict overnight stays. So unfortunately, no matter how good the venue, they're not allowed at the moment. And as I sort of said in my presentation, I'm not expecting those rules to even be changing until after Easter. Graham's asked, one of our youth work strands as a town council is the provision of a skate park. One of the key initial issues with seeing skate parks as a play and not sports facilities. Perhaps some national dialogue on such provision from the NYA, Public Health England, Skate Park England might help confusion. I don't think this is an issue for the youth sector guidance, Graham, being honest, because a skate park would be a public amenity, would come under parks, sort of parks legislation and guidance. And I'm no expert on that space, I'm afraid. I do know from a Public Health England perspective, anything outdoors is generally welcomed. Anything that's active outdoors is generally welcomed, because the capacity of the virus to be spread around when you're outside is minuscule compared to indoors. So an outdoor skate park is probably more preferred by Public Health England to an indoor skate park, for example. But I can't really help you any further. Sarah's asked, there are discussions on closing schools for 2 weeks at October half term instead of just doing 1 week as normal. If this happened, would we still be able to run activities? You're in the Liverpool region. We believe you would. So even if there's that sort of extended half term, nothing is telling us that the youth sector would have to close. We would stay at amber. It is part of even if schools go, so there's also talk of schools moving to 1 week on, 1 week off, or 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, but schools are still active in that period. And so we would be able to remain at amber and continue to operate. Sorry, I lost my screen. Deborah's asked, any news about overnight? I've done that question. Sorry. Elaine's asked, we've been looking into schools' guidance on dedicated transport. Will the new guidance have more information on this? There's not much more to be said around transport than what's in our current guidance. It is possible, it can be done, but there are certain, distancing, hygiene requirements that are needed. We've not at this point expanded further on that. If that's a big issue, we can certainly take a look at it for future updates. Daniel's asked, how does the 3-tier system refer to the traffic light system? So at the moment, the 3 tiers are all in our amber level. So all 3 tiers apply to amber. Follow the NYA guidance and you can carry on operating as normal. Samantha's asked, I've got the next question as well. Walton Youth Project, hello. We have found that some of our users whom have not declared any medical needs or disabilities have purchased an exemption mask card from the internet so they don't have to wear a mask. Are we in our right to refuse entry and to confirm with parents? So the rule of thumb in terms of who's exempt or not is if the individual declares they're exempt, then you should take that at face value. There's probably nothing wrong with checking that with parents themselves to make sure that's the case. We're not aware, there is no national exemption card. There are badges you can buy on eBay and what have you that you can put on, but I don't believe, and very rarely, occasionally doctors have issued letters and things, but that is the absolute exception, not the norm. It is self-determination whether you feel unable to manage a mask or a face cover, and therefore, if someone says to you, "I'm exempt," then you might want to ask them what the reason for that exemption is, but you don't know. You shouldn't pry too much, and it is for them to self-determine. Joe's asked, do young people need to wear face coverings if they're doing physical activities indoors? The answer is it depends. If it requires lots of huffing and puffing, so kicking a football around in a sports hall, then the regulations do allow for the face coverings to be removed. If they're just playing pool or something else, then we would encourage them to continue to wear them. But if in team sports, they are not required. But just to give you an example, if you're playing football, people shouldn't be headering the ball, they shouldn't be picking it up. There should be extra sort of rules put in place to manage that, because every time the ball is touched, it needs to be cleaned before it's picked up by the next person. So no heading and certainly no picking up and throwing in from the sidelines. It should just be kicked around and treated as such. So things like that you need to be thinking about when you're doing your risk assessments. Natalie's asking, mixed groups from across the country, would this be okay as long as the rules, abide by the rules? I mean, yes, technically, there are certain areas. So I know in the Liverpool City region, they're sort of saying, please don't travel. If you can avoid it, only essential travel. And if you're in an area where locally they're saying only essential travel, you need to be really clear why you want to go and travel outside of that area and whether there's other activities that will achieve the same objectives you're trying to do. But no, you can travel around the country. You can go to other events. You can do things like that. That's not a problem. But I think just we need to show that the sector's being responsible, and if asked not to by your local authority, then maybe consider trying not to do that. So Cass asks, could you just repeat the under 18s, over 18s bubbles? We are 10 to 26-year-olds or running a 26 with mixed age bubbles. Okay, so Kath, read the document when it comes out next week, because we're still hammering this out with government. But what we do know is that the regulations changed between under 18s and over 18s. So under 18s, bubbles of 15 plus staff, absolutely fine. For over 18s, there's something called a support bubble, and you can have one support bubble in a venue of up to 15 adults, but that includes staff. So if you have more than 15 individuals, including workers, then you have to break the whole group down into a rule of 6 and have lots of groups of 6. We are trying to get an exemption from this, and I'm hopeful we will achieve that. If we don't get that by next week, if we achieve it in the future, then we will update the guidance to reflect that as well. So yeah, the rules under 18. If you've got a mixed group, then actually the over 18 rule applies. So you are allowed one bubble of 15, including staff. So you might need to be thinking that through. But our new guidance document, we wrote it this week. It's much clearer, and we'll hopefully put that in black and white for you. We'll also have wider comms and graphics to show as well. So we're working through that at the moment. So John has asked, can our 11 to 15-year-olds play football or do boxing training without a mask? Yes, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Again, hygiene needs to be really clear, and cleaning of pads and things if you're doing boxing exercise, things like that. I would question whether you need to be doing those activities if there's going to be lots of hot, sweaty stuff going on that could be lots of air particulates floating around. If that can be avoided, then you try and do so. But it is allowed. It is allowed. So Amar's asked, is it safe to continue Erasmus Plus projects, hosting international volunteers in the UK in line with current guidance? There's nothing from the NYA that would stop any of that activity. You should certainly be aware of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. They're changing the name of it, aren't they? But to talk to the FCO and follow their guidance, because it may be that other nations' volunteers can't travel here, and we may not be able to travel to other countries. There are very few places that people can travel in or out of at the moment, but there's nothing in the NYA guidance that would restrict that activity taking place. Talk to the British Youth Council, not British Youth Council. Talk to the British Council. They will guide. I'm sure they will gladly guide you. Peter's asked, if a young person is self-isolating from school, i.e. no symptoms, but someone in the year group does, are they able to attend other non-school activities? In terms of the regulations, they are allowed to attend. We would encourage you to contact NHS Test and Trace on 119. Just pick the phone up, dial 119, and they'll connect you through to them and ask the question. And because what they'll ask you to do is talk you through the scenario around that individual, those groups of young people, and they will give you hopefully quite clear advice. We've so far had quite positive feedback on that process. In terms of the regulations, as we understand it, they are still allowed to come and attend, because unless they've been tested as as positive for COVID-19, you're still allowed out and you can still do activities. The minute you have a positive test, you have a legal duty, and parents have this duty for their children to make sure that people stay at home and isolate. But if they've not had a positive test, or they've been tested and they're not positive, then they're absolutely fine for them to still attend. So Zachariah, is there any guidance on cooking in youth provision? No, nothing specific, although there is advice in our guidance regarding the hygiene requirements. So, you shouldn't be in a kitchen with lots of young people packed in. They need to be spread out. They shouldn't be, I don't know, you're making a big bowl of soup. You shouldn't have multiple people stirring the soup, one individual with one spatula going round and round. It should be washed before it's given to another individual. Surfaces should be cleaned. Equipment should only be used by one individual at a time. What you're trying to avoid is contact points with multiple items transferring between different groups of young people. So, it's quite tricky and makes doing activities quite difficult, but you shouldn't have lots of young people in a room all piling in, doing making a spaghetti bolognese and all stirring it. One individual should be responsible for certain activities at a time. Dan's asked as a follow-up question about meeting in a youth club of the world. The general public are not allowed to meet anyone from another household inside anywhere. That includes cafes. So are we allowed to meet young people from different households because the youth sector is exempt, as we would only people who can do that in tier 3 area? You're not the only people that can do that. There are other exemptions for other parts of the society. But yes, that's absolutely correct. We are exempt from those rules if it is professional, if it's risk assessed, planned youth sector activity. So a random meeting somebody, no, but if you pre-plan to meet them, if you've risk assessed it, if you've got your action plan in place, then you're on perfectly solid ground to continue to do so. Ryan's asked, how many groups bubbles can operate in red readiness level if we go back there? So if we end up in red, you'll be allowed one bubble of targeted high need groups of young people. So one bubble at a time. And we don't know how large that bubble will be at this point. So if you're on a massive, lovely on-site, if you're an on-site zone with vast amounts of space, unfortunately, you will only be allowed one group of maybe up to 10 young people and a couple of staff. That will be it at a time. Sam's asked, are there any implications for young people, staff traveling between areas, between different tiers? I mean, no is the general answer, other than I said a minute ago. If ideally, if there's a local requirement or request not to be traveling unless essential, then you should really consider whether you need to travel around. But no, they can travel in between boroughs or different areas. There's nothing stopping that at all if attending your provision. Okay. A few people are asking about basketball. Is it off limits because of hand contact? Essentially, I think it probably is, in truth, because you have to pass a ball between people. And by doing so, lots of people would touch that ball and could transfer spores of the virus between different people. So yeah, basketball, we've not outlawed it, because there are basketball types of activities you could do, shooting competitions, and if everyone's got their own ball, there are ways around doing certain types of activity. But yeah, generally that would be quite tricky and probably to be avoided. So that's all the questions that have come through to us or have been forwarded through to me. I'm going to stop sharing this so you can all see me. And so I think we're done. And thank you for joining us. Our time is up. Look at that. There's only a few minutes left, so we'll give you 5 minutes more of your time back. If you've got any other burning issues or concerns, you can contact the NYA at our guidance inbox. So it's guidance@nya.org.uk, and we get back to you within about 48 hours. We try and get back to you much quicker, but we will do our best. Apologies for the technology failure earlier on. I hope everyone caught up and we got all the messages across. And have a great day.